What's up, guys? This class, if you look on Google Classroom, is called Sci-Fi and Fantasy Literature, but if you actually look on the schedule or your report card, it's going to say novels, sci-fi and fantasy, and we haven't read any novels yet, so I want to move in that direction. This is a novella. It's something in between, longer than a short story, not quite a full book. This one, I believe, let's see the word count. It's 26,000 words, which sounds like a lot, but it's half of a small book. If you take a small book like Of Mice and Men or Great Gatsby, those are 50,000-ish. And if you take a long book like one of the big Harry Potters, those are like 250,000. So 26,000 sounds a lot. This is not bad. We're going to break it up into 5 parts because it's already broken up into 5 parts. It has 5 chapters, and we'll do one at a time. This video is going to introduce the first chapter. I'm going to read some aloud and describe some thoughts and things you should know along the way, and then I'll let you loose to read the rest. And then I'll post another video next time about chapter 2 doing the same thing. Okay? This is a story by H.P. Lovecraft. It's titled The Shadow Over Innsmouth. And if you don't recognize the story, or you haven't read from this guy before, you might recognize the name. H.P. Lovecraft is referenced a lot, and things are described as Lovecraftian a lot. And maybe after reading this, you'll know what that means. Let's get into it, and I'll describe things along the way. During the winter of 1927-28, officials of the federal government made a strange and secret investigation of certain conditions in the ancient Massachusetts seaport of Innsmouth. The public first learned of it in February, when a vast series of raids and arrests occurred, followed by the deliberate burning and dynamiting, under suitable precautions, of an enormous number of crumbling, worm-eaten, and supposedly empty houses along the abandoned waterfront. Uninquiring souls let this occurrence pass as one of the major clashes in a spasmodic war on liquor. This is written like a news report. We don't have a main character yet. We don't have a real point of view except this omniscient looking down, describing things as they happened, somewhere else. This isn't personal yet. And as you can see in the title of the doc, this was written in 1931, so it's only set a few years ago. And he mentions the war on liquor. This is talking about prohibition. If someone had alcohol, not just a person, but an organization, maybe mob, maybe smuggling, then the federal government would come in, or a powerful local police force would come in. You might think of something like The Untouchables. That movie shows a Chicago version of it. And this is not that, but the idea is that something happened in this town of Innsmouth. The feds came in, blew up some buildings, arrested a bunch of people, and you could, if you weren't thinking about it too much, you could think, oh, maybe it's part of some liquor raids. Of course it wasn't. Keener news followers, however, wondered at the prodigious number of arrests, the abnormally large force of men used in making them, and the secrecy surrounding the disposal of the prisoners. No trials or even definite charges were reported, nor were any of the captives seen thereafter in the regular jails of the nation. There were vague statements about disease and concentration camps, and later about dispersal in various naval and military prisons, but nothing positive ever developed. Innsmouth itself was left almost depopulated, and is even now only beginning to show signs of a sluggishly revived existence. So we're building up to this. We're building up this mystery, and one thing you'll notice is that this paragraph has a couple old-fashioned words, or normal words with old-fashioned spellings. So the word jails, that's the word you know, but we spell it J-A-I-L, and the older way, the British way, which you still see every once in a while, I saw it recently in the video game Bloodborne, is the G-A-O-L. It's the same word though, nothing fancy, just once you get used to it, you'll blow by this stuff and not get tripped up. Another is show. This is the word show that we all know, but we spell it with an O. And older forms, British forms, you might actually see this in the King James Bible. They use this word a lot. Will have the EW, but it's the same word. Nothing crazy. Don't let it mess you up. Okay. Complaints from many liberal organizations were met with long confidential discussions, and representatives were taken on trips to certain camps and prisons. As a result, these societies became surprisingly passive and reticent. Newspaper men were harder to manage, but seemed largely to cooperate with the government in the end. Only one paper, a tabloid always discounted because of its wild policy, mentioned the deep-diving submarine that discharged torpedoes downward in the marine abyss just beyond Devil Reef. That item, gathered by chance in a haunt of sailors, seemed indeed rather far-fetched, since the low black reef lies a full mile and a half out from Innsmouth Harbor. Okay, it's more than we thought. These buildings were not blown up by, cops with C4 on the doorway or something. These buildings were blown up by a submarine, or at least that's the rumor. And we're building up the rumor. One thing that this story does that we haven't seen is a slow, creeping, sense of like walking up to the haunted house, and maybe the stair makes a sound and you don't know if it was a ghost, or there's a craggy shadow against the moon and you don't know if it's a tree or the hand of a demon. You can't do that in a short story because short stories got to go quick, got to get in, get out, and they're done. But a longer thing like this can take its time and can build up that feeling that we haven't seen yet. We talked about, at the end of quarter 3, we talked about adapting from one medium to another, book or movie or game or so on. And those give you different feelings. But even just a short story to a long story has its own attributes. Okay. People around the country and in the nearby towns muttered a great deal among themselves, but said very little to the outer world. They had talked about dying in half-deserted Innsmouth for nearly a century, and nothing new could be wilder or more hideous than what they had whispered and hinted years before. Many things had taught them secretiveness, and there was now no need to exert pressure on them. Besides, they really knew very little, for wide salt marshes, desolate and unpeopled, kept neighbors off from Innsmouth on the landward side. You might think of like the beginning of a Friday the 13th movie where our characters are saying, hey, we're going to Camp Crystal Lake, and then everyone in the surrounding area, maybe at the gas station or the crazy old guy on the road, will say, no, don't go there, it's cursed, you'll never come back, If you've ever seen the movie Cabin in the Woods, they call that the Harbinger, okay? And we're going to get that in this story. We got the summary of it right here, how the neighboring towns will warn people away, and they don't know for sure, but they know it's bad. And we're going to get it more specifically when we see our main character walk up, get scenes, get details, and so on. And speaking of our main character, here he is in the next paragraph. But at last, I am going to defy the ban on speech about this thing. Results, I am certain, are so thorough that no public harm save a shock of repulsion could ever accrue from a hinting of what was found by those horrified raiders at Innsmouth. Besides, what was found might possibly have more than one explanation. I do not know just how much of the whole tale has been told even to me, and I have many reasons for not wishing to probe deeper. For my contact with this affair has been closer than that of any other layman, and I have carried away impressions which are yet to drive me to drastic measures. You might start thinking, once you get into this, that it sounds a lot like Edgar Allan Poe. Okay, if you've read Poe in other classes, probably starting in 8th grade, and you may have seen The Cask of Amontillado, Telltale Heart, etc. Poe has two kinds of narrators. One is the crazy guy, who keeps saying, I'm not crazy, I'm not the killer, when of course they are. But the other type of narrator Poe has is the calm, scientific guy who goes into something crazy, but he tries to describe it as normally as he can. And that's what we're going to see here. This guy is very much like a Poe narrator, and H.P. Lovecraft was very much influenced by Poe. Okay, he lived geographically not too far from where Poe did, and he just has a similar sense of, even the writing, it's decades later, but it feels very similar. It was I who fled frantically out of Innsmouth in the early morning hours of July 16, 1927, and whose frightened appeals for government inquiry and action brought on the whole reported episode. I was willing enough to stay mute while the affair was fresh and uncertain, but now that it is an old story, with public interest and curiosity gone, I have an odd craving to whisper about those few frightful hours in that ill-rumored and evilly shadowed seaport of death and blasphemous abnormality. That's a good sentence. The mere telling helps me to restore confidence in my own faculties, and to reassure myself that I was not simply the first to succumb to a contagious nightmare hallucination. It helps me, too, in making up my mind regarding a certain terrible step which lies ahead of me. Okay, so now we're going to get into it. The beginning couple paragraphs told us something happened in this town. The government came in, blew up some buildings, arrested some people. Nobody knows, but it's bad. Okay? They mentioned certain liberal organizations had investigated. Maybe the ACLU said, hey, you can't just kidnap a whole town. What's going on? But then they said, after being shown what was going on, these organizations quieted up. So maybe they were scared of the government, or maybe they were scared of what they saw. And we're going to see the same. This is going to be the beginning of a flashback. Okay, so the narrator said, I was the one who went into town, and I called the government to come take out the monster. And now I'm going to tell you what happened on that fateful day. So the rest of the story, starting right here, is oh my gosh, I just messed it up, is a flashback saying, here's what happened when I went into the town. People told me not to, but I did it anyway. I saw the bad stuff. I barely survived. I called the feds, etc., etc. Okay? I'm going to read a little more, and then I'll let you do the rest, as I said. I never heard of Innsmouth till the day before I saw it for the first and so far last time. I was celebrating my coming of age by a tour of New England, sightseeing, antiquarian, and genealogical, and had planned to go directly from ancient Newburyport to Arkham, whence my mother's family was derived. I had no car, but was traveling by train, trolley, and motor coach, always seeking the cheapest possible route. In Newburyport, they told me that the steam train was the thing to take to Arkham, and it was only at the station ticket office, when I demurred at the high fare, that I learned about Innsmouth. The stout, shrewd-faced agent, whose speech showed him to be no local man, seemed sympathetic toward my efforts in economy, and made a suggestion that none of my other informants had offered. You could take that old bus, I suppose, he said with certain hesitation, but it ain't thought much of hereabouts. It goes through Innsmouth, you may have heard about that, and so the people don't like it. Run by an Innsmouth fellow, Joe Sargent, but never gets any custom from here or Arkham either, I guess. Wonder it keeps running at all. I suppose it's cheap enough, but I never see more than 2 or 3 people in it. Nobody but those Innsmouth folks. Leaves the square in front of Hammond's drugstore at 10 a.m. and 7 p.m., unless they've changed lately. Looks like a terrible rattle trap. I've never been on. Alright, so this is our first harbinger, our first character who says, I don't know about this, you might want to be careful, you might not go. Our narrator is going through New England, and it says sightseeing antiquarian, meaning he's collecting antiques, and genealogical, meaning he's looking through his family history, was the reason he's going to these places. And he's going to Arkham. Arkham is a big place in the H.P. Lovecraft universe. If you've read his other stories, Arkham is where they have a university that studies like the strange, the weird, the ghosts and ghouls, and the old gods that exist in this world that you can find hints of if you really look. Okay. That was the first I ever heard of Shadow Over Innsmouth. Any reference to a town not shown on common maps or listed in recent guidebooks would have interested me. And the agent's odd manner of allusion roused something like real curiosity. A town able to inspire such dislike in its neighbors, I thought, must be at least rather unusual and worthy of a tourist's attention. If it came before Arkham, I would stop off there. And so I asked the agent to tell me something about it. He was very deliberate, and spoke with an air of feeling slightly superior to what he said. Innsmouth, well, it's a queer kind of town down at the mouth of the Monuxet. Used to be almost a city, quite a port before the War of 1812, but all gone to pieces in the last 100 years or so. No railroad now, B&M never went through, and the branch line from Rowley was given up years ago. More empty houses than there are people, I guess, and no business to speak of except fishing and lobstering. Everybody trades mostly here or in Arkham or Ipswich. Once they had quite a few mills, but nothing's left now except one gold refinery running on the leanest kind of part-time. That refinery, though, used to be a big thing. And Old Man Marsh, who now owns it, must be richer than Croesus. Queer old duck, though, and sticks mighty close in his home. He's supposed to have developed some skin disease or deformity late in life that makes him keep out of sight. Grandson of Captain Obed Marsh, who founded the business. His mother seems to have been some kind of foreigner. They say a South Sea Islander. So everybody raised Cain when he married an Ipswich girl 50 years ago. They always do that about Innsmouth people, and folks here and abouts always try to cover up any Innsmouth blood they have in them. But Marsh's children and grandchildren looks just like anyone else's so far as I can see. I've had them pointed out to me here, though come to think of it, the elder children don't seem to be around lately. Never saw the old man. Ooh, we're getting there. So we're getting somewhere. And why is everybody so down on Innsmouth? Well, young fellow, you mustn't take too much stock in what people around here say. They're hard to get started, but once they do get started, they never let up. They've been telling things about Innsmouth, whispering them mostly for the last 100 years, I guess, and they're more scared than anything else. Some of the stories would make you laugh. About old Captain Marsh driving bargains with the devil, bringing imps out of hell to live in Innsmouth. Or about some kind of devil worship and awful sacrifices in some place near the wharves that people stumble on around 1845 or thereabouts. But I come from Panton, Vermont, and that kind of story don't go down with me. So I'm going to stop here. We're going to get a little more from this guy, and it's the kind of thing that once you look back later, you realize all the key moments were there. But now it's just kind of a general mystery, right? When you do learn specifics, it's not a story that keeps vague the whole way. Once you learn at the end what's going on, you can look back at this and see, oh, he knew all the info. Something about this town of Innsmouth is very mysterious. The people there, well, they're on the coast, so they have contact with other places. They have immigrants and traders coming in, and they find weird treasure in the deep sea. Who knows? And they don't like the surrounding towns. They try to keep to themselves. They hide away in their houses, and they don't really deal with the guys next door and these other towns he's mentioned. So, are the people right? Did they really make a deal with the devil? Did they really have monstrous changes? Or is it just maybe one guy has a skin disease and he looks a little weird? We're going to see this as we go, and I'll let you read the first chapter. I'll do a video chapter 2 beginning, and so on as we go. The benefit of reading something longer like this, instead of just short stories, is that it builds up to something where they all come together. Okay? This is 5 chapters, and we could just read 5 different short stories, but then they would be different. They would be separate. If we read these 5 chapters, by the end, we'll know a bigger story, and we'll be able to look back at this and see what was really going on at the beginning. We'll be able to think of other stories in this universe from this writer, and even other stories from other people that are inspired by it. So, give it a shot, see what you think, and let me know.